It was a quiet Sunday night, February 2nd, 2014, just before 11 p.m. Brenda Lazaro stepped out of the bathroom. Steam still clung to her skin, but the chill in her chest was colder than anything water could cause. The day had been heavy. Arguments. Silence. Stares that said too much. Jonathan Cruz, her boyfriend, had tried to smooth things over. But the thing he'd done, the thing he insisted was no big deal, had cracked something in her. She stood there. Her heart said one thing. Her pride said another. Still, almost without thinking, her feet moved toward the bedroom. Jonathan was already lying on the bed, but Brenda couldn't bring herself to lie beside him. She lowered herself to the floor, sat next to the bed, her knees pulled close, her back to him. Then he told her, "I love you." But she didn't turn. Couldn't. And then he said something else. Something that didn't sound like love at all. "Cover your ears." For a split second, she thought she misheard him. But before she could ask, a deafening blast tore through the room. A single bang. So sharp, so powerful, it swallowed the entire noise of Super Bowl Sunday, echoing through homes all across the country. She pressed her palms to his chest, trying to stop the bleeding. But nothing helped. It was already too late. She grabbed the phone, her fingers slipping, dialed 911. Her voice cracked with panic. The dispatcher asked for the address, but she didn't know it. Jonathan had only just moved in. And though Brenda was American, she had spent most of her life in Mexico. Her English was good, but not in moments like this. The dispatcher told her to ask a neighbor, but she was frozen, shaking. It took over 8 minutes before someone managed to get the address to the dispatcher. By then the story had already begun. A story with broken timelines, twisted truths, and an avalanche of questions. Some say justice was never served. Others say it was. Just not in time. But here's what no one can agree on. What really happened that night? About 20 minutes after the call came through, flashing lights broke the stillness outside River Chase Apartments in Coppell, a quiet Dallas suburb. Police units pulled in fast. Paramedics followed close behind. They had one destination, Jonathan Cruz's apartment. As they stepped inside, it hit them instantly. Jonathan wasn't breathing. He was gone. The medics stopped. This was no longer a rescue. Now it was up to the officers to figure out what exactly happened inside this room. Brenda Lazaro sat in shock, her hands shaking, her eyes vacant. Officers tried to speak with her gently, calm her down. But behind them, the real storm had already started. The investigators entered the bedroom, and the second they stepped in, they felt it. Something was off. Jonathan's body was lying on the bed, still, lifeless. But that wasn't what stopped them cold. What truly didn't sit right was the injury itself. It was to his chest. That detail changed everything. Because in most cases where someone harms themselves in such a way, the injury is to the head. Quick. Immediate. But this. A single shot to the chest. Why would anyone choose that? And just as that question started brewing in their minds, something else happened. One of the officers called out that the magazine's missing. Everyone froze. The handgun was still on the bed right next to Jonathan. But the part that holds extra rounds? Gone. Now the question shifted. Was this even the weapon used? Or was there another firearm involved that no one had seen yet? And just as the lead investigator turned to consider that possibility, another voice cut through the room. He told them that he found a magazine tucked nearby. Same model, same brand. And now things were spiraling fast. Why would someone remove the magazine, leave a single bullet inside? That's not how these things usually go. That's not how someone ends their life. And just as they were preparing to transport Jonathan's body, another twist. While lifting the mattress, one of the medics noticed something slide out. It was Jonathan's phone. Screen cracked, hidden under the bed. That discovery hit differently. Why was it there? Why was it broken? Had someone tried to hide it? Or had there been a struggle? The lead detective stepped outside. The questions were growing fast. Why shoot from the chest? Why not standing up like so many other cases? Why remove the magazine but leave one bullet? And most of all, what happened to that phone? There was only one person who might know the truth, Brenda Lazaro, and the moment to speak with her had just arrived. As the lead investigator stepped outside the apartment, his eyes locked on a small cluster of people standing under the dim hallway light. Brenda Lazaro was there, her face pale, her body still trembling. But what caught his attention more was who she was standing with, Jonathan Crew's family. They had arrived fast, shocked, devastated. But even through their heartbreak, they clung to each other, offering quiet comfort. And among them, Danielle Cruz, Jonathan's sister. Danielle wasn't just family. She was also a close friend of Brenda's. The investigator approached slowly. He asked Brenda to come with him to the station to give a full statement. She nodded weakly. But before she could move, Danielle stepped forward. Her voice cracked as she asked the question no one wanted to ask. How did he die? The answer came low but clear. A shot to the chest. Danielle's face dropped. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply went silent. Because in that moment, two truths hit her at once. Jonathan had no plans to leave this world, and he knew how to handle a weapon. He was careful, skilled, calm under pressure. Whatever happened in that room, Danielle knew in her gut, it didn't make sense. It didn't add up. But for now, she said nothing. At the station, Brenda sat down with the investigators. Her voice was still shaky, but her words were steady. She told them she'd come over around midday. They had lunch together, Chinese food delivered in. Things were normal at first. But then she mentioned something. That morning, Jonathan had visitors, Emily Ramsey and Jacob Ramsey. The names rang in the lead investigator's head like a quiet alarm. Brenda said the argument started not long after they left. And it didn't stop. The officers pressed her gently. What exactly caused the fight? Brenda hesitated, then admitted it. She didn't like Emily Ramsey, didn't trust her. Especially not after what happened in December 2013, just a month after she and Jonathan started dating. The room grew still. The lead detective leaned in. What happened in December? Brenda explained. There had been a small gathering. Jonathan was there with his former roommate Jacob Ramsey. Emily showed up too. And when she greeted Jonathan, she hugged him. But not just any hug. When the investigator asked if it was inappropriate, Brenda said yes. And when they asked why Emily would even be there with Jacob, she said plainly. They were dating. Emily and Jacob were together. That answer made everyone in the room pause. If Emily was dating Jacob, why was she hugging Jonathan like that? And could that moment, a single hug, really set off a fight that lasted the entire day? A fight that ended with Jonathan lifeless on the bed? Something felt off. Then came another question. The gun. Brenda confirmed Jonathan owned firearms. He kept them in the apartment. And yes, he was trained. He knew exactly how to use them. But the most critical question was still hanging in the air. The phone. Why was Jonathan's phone found broken and hidden under the mattress? Brenda said she hadn't seen it all day. Didn't know if it was damaged before she got there or after. 3 hours passed. They took her fingerprints, swabbed her hands for a residue test to determine if she had recently handled a firearm, and then she was released. But as Brenda walked out of the station, the detectives remained. They sat with her words laid out in front of them, trying to find a pattern, a truth, a motive. But instead, they found more questions. How could an argument over something that happened in December still have so much weight in February? Was that hug really inappropriate, or was it something more? And perhaps the biggest question of all, was Emily Ramsey actually trying to get close to Jonathan? If there were answers, they weren't with Brenda. They were with Emily. And now, everyone wanted to hear what she had to say. At exactly 9 a.m. the next morning, Emily Ramsey and Jacob Ramsey stepped into Jonathan's family home. They'd spent the night there offering whatever comfort they could to people still struggling to understand the impossible. But just as they were trying to settle, the phone rang. On the other end, a detective from Capel Police Department asking Emily to come in for questioning. They didn't hesitate. Minutes later, Emily and Jacob were on their way to the station. Inside the interview room, Emily didn't wait for the questions to begin. She dropped a bomb before the detective could even open his notebook. She pulled out her phone. Quietly, calmly, she showed them a message. She said to the officer, "I got this from Jonathan's number. It came in at 10:52 p.m., right during the Super Bowl." The detective leaned in. The message read, "I want to die." For a brief moment, it seemed like the message supported Brenda's version of the story, that Jonathan had taken that step himself. But Emily wasn't finished. She looked the detective in the eye and dropped another blow. "I don't think he wrote it." The room shifted. Why not? Why would someone fake that? Emily's answer was clear. She had known Jonathan since they were kids. She knew his style, the way he texted. And this wasn't him. She explained that Jonathan always sent either long messages or a series of short ones, never just a single vague line. And she and Jacob had both been there when the message came through. They waited a minute, expected more, but nothing came. So Emily texted him back and asked if he was okay. No answer. That was when the last thin thread holding the self-inflicted theory snapped. The detectives now had to face a new idea. Someone had sent that message from Jonathan's phone, then shattered the screen, then hid the phone, and then pulled the trigger. Everything was pointing in one direction now, but still, they didn't show their hand. Instead, they pressed on. They asked about her relationship with Jonathan. Emily said what she'd always said. He was like a brother to her, childhood friend, protective, kind. He even introduced her to Jacob. He wanted her to be with someone who would treat her right. Jonathan believed Jacob was that person to her. Then the investigators brought up December 2013, the day of the infamous hug. Emily nodded. She said the gathering was supposed to be a chance for everyone to meet Jonathan's new girlfriend, Brenda. But when she walked in and hugged Jonathan like she always had, she felt the tension instantly. Brenda didn't say much, but her silence was loud. In the days after the gathering, Jonathan told Emily the truth. Brenda hadn't taken it well. She was jealous. She was angry. Emily even offered to talk to her, to clear things up. But when she did, Brenda lashed out, told her to stay away from her man, and made it clear she wasn't welcome. Still, Emily tried to back off. She even told Jonathan she'd disappear from his life completely if that's what it took to save his relationship. But Jonathan refused. He told her he'd only been seeing Brenda for 3 months. He wasn't going to throw away a lifelong friendship over something that new. He said he'd try to fix things, calm things down. But if he couldn't, he'd walk away from Brenda. First, though, he said he wanted to talk to Danielle, his sister, the one person who understood both sides. Later, Emily revealed one more detail that stood out. She and Jacob had visited Jonathan on the very same day of the tragedy. They wanted to see his new place, celebrate with him, and something caught their attention. Jonathan's weapons were stored in plain sight. Jacob even joked about it. He told him the setup looked like he was scared to live alone. That detail stuck, because now the investigators had 2 versions of this story. Brenda claimed Emily was acting inappropriately, getting too close, threatening her relationship. Emily claimed Jonathan was like a brother, that Brenda was the one who lost control. So, who was telling the truth? The pieces didn't fit, not yet. But there was one person who knew them both, someone who wasn't just close to Jonathan, but close to Emily and Brenda too. Danielle Cruz, Jonathan's sister. If anyone could connect the dots, it was her. And now the case was leading straight to her door. It wasn't until a full week after Jonathan's passing that Danielle Cruz was finally called in to give her statement. The delay wasn't neglect. The moment the autopsy was complete, the family had moved straight into funeral preparations. Pain doesn't wait for protocol. When Danielle walked into the Capel Police Department, the investigators didn't treat her like the others. No rapid-fire questions, no pressure. They wanted her to talk freely, to remember, to paint a full picture, not just of what happened that day, but of who Jonathan really was. And that picture was striking. Jonathan John Cruz. Born May 1986 in California. Raised in Irving, Texas after his father John, a lawyer and non-denominational pastor, moved the family. Jonathan was calm, the kind of person everyone gravitated toward. He fell in love quickly, wanted stability, and had a pattern. He often found himself drawn to women who needed fixing, women with chaos. He tried to be their anchor. He took firearm safety seriously. He wasn't careless. He had no record of mental health issues, no medication, no signs of instability. He adored his mother, Pam, and his bond with Danielle, closer than siblings. They were best friends. He studied history and graduated from Baylor University in 2009. Came back home and got a corgi named Ulysses. Worked retail and later became operations director at an urgent care clinic. He was so good at it, the company landed a $400,000 investment under his leadership. That's the kind of man he was. And that's who Brenda Lazaro came to know, through Danielle. They met at a martial arts school. Brenda was an instructor, Danielle a student. They became close friends long before Jonathan entered the picture. It was through Danielle and her circle that Jonathan and Brenda met. Their relationship started around November 2013, but it didn't take long before things turned. Brenda was deeply jealous, controlling. There were constant arguments, and Jonathan, according to Danielle, was already thinking of ending it. He even texted Danielle. Laid out 4 options. Try to fix things. Choose Brenda and cut off Emily. Do nothing and wait for Brenda to leave. Or end it himself and minimize the damage. He chose the last one. On February 1st, just one day before the tragedy, he told Danielle directly, "I'm talking to her today. I'm ending it." That same day, he had lunch with Jacob and Emily. And then, everything changed. Brenda called during lunch, heard Emily's voice, demanded to speak with her. When she did, she cursed her out. After lunch, Jonathan looked at his friends and said something that stayed with Danielle forever. "I'm going home to pack her stuff." Hours later, he was gone. Danielle shared one more thing that made the detectives stop cold. Brenda stayed with the Cruz family for 3 days after Jonathan's passing. On the 4th night, she disappeared without telling anyone, never came back, never attended the service. Instead, she sent Danielle a Facebook message, not to offer comfort, but to scold them. She was upset, accused them of ignoring her during the memorial, claimed they never mentioned how much Jonathan loved her. That message didn't sit right, because now the picture was shifting fast. Everything Brenda said about Emily, falling apart. Everything Brenda said about Jonathan's final moments, deeply questionable. She never once mentioned that Jonathan had planned to leave her, never hinted that the relationship was on the verge of collapse. So, was she left in the dark? Or was she hiding something? Investigators started to piece things together. Their theory was building. A theory that didn't end with Jonathan making that choice, but with Brenda making it for him. But then came a document that turned everything on its head. The autopsy report. Jonathan had been hit with a shot to the left side of his chest. But that wasn't the bombshell. The real shock came in a single sentence. Both Jonathan and Brenda had gunshot residue on their hands. Jonathan only had residue on his right hand, but Brenda both hands. One final detail from the forensic report. There were no fingerprints on the magazine, not Brenda's, not even Jonathan's. Completely clean. And on the weapon itself. Only one set of prints, Jonathan's. There wasn't a single trace of Brenda's touch. That detail froze the entire case. And at the bottom of the page in bold, clear print was the line that would stall justice for nearly a decade. Cause of death. Undetermined. 8 years. That's how long those words would keep this case in limbo. For 8 long years, Jonathan Cruz's family lived with one truth burned into their hearts. He didn't choose to leave this world. They knew something wasn't right. Every detail, every inconsistency pointed in one direction, toward Brenda Lazaro. Just 1 year after Jonathan's passing, the Cruz family made another trip to the police department, like many before, pleading, hoping. This time there were new detectives assigned to the cold case unit, and this time, the response was different. They were told the case could be solved. They were told to give it 6 weeks. But 8 weeks passed, and silence followed. When they returned, the answer was crushing. The detectives said they'd reviewed everything, but what they found wasn't enough to reopen the case. By early 2016, the Cruz family had had enough. They took their fight public. They began speaking to the media, searching for justice in front of the cameras since they couldn't get it behind closed doors. That's when someone new heard the story, and everything changed. Her name was Sheila Wysocki, not your average private investigator. She had become one after solving the unsolved case of her best friend's death, on her own. She wasn't just driven. She was born for this. When Sheila took the case, she didn't follow the file. She looked for what was missing. The first thing she studied, the 911 call. And it didn't take long before things unraveled. Right away, she noticed that even though Brenda sounded shaken, the dispatcher asked her in the very first minute to get a neighbor for the correct address. But Brenda stalled, fumbled, talked in circles. 8 full minutes passed before help was finally sent. That wasn't normal. Not for someone who's desperate to save the person they love. And then, Sheila caught something chilling. On the call, Brenda first said Jonathan had been attacked. Then, moments later, she said he had done it himself. The contradictions didn't stop there. Sheila had another question. Who was the neighbor that gave the address? Why wasn't he ever interviewed? So she found him herself, and what he told her cracked the case wide open. He said he heard the gunshot almost 30 minutes before Brenda ever knocked on his door, which means Brenda may have waited over 22 minutes before calling for help. Now Sheila knew. This wasn't just strange. This was deliberate. Brenda was living close by, never reached out to the family, but somehow they still heard about her. She'd moved in with someone new. She was building a life just a few streets from where Jonathan's had ended. Still, Sheila needed more. She went back to the scene, to the evidence, to the autopsy. She recreated the trajectory of the shot, and what she found was damning. The angle, the location, the entry point. It made one thing clear. Someone right-handed like Jonathan would find it nearly impossible to shoot themselves in that exact spot. Physically, it didn't work. But that wasn't enough. She needed science. She requested the shirt Jonathan wore that night for a distance determination test, a forensic analysis that could reveal how far the gun was from the body when it was fired. Brenda's legal team fought to block it. The Cruz family threatened to sue. Months later, the shirt was released. And the results? They didn't confirm the shot came from far away, but they didn't rule it out either. And to Jonathan's family, that was enough. It kept their theory alive. It meant the door wasn't shut. But then, Sheila found one more piece, one last thread. 2 days before he died, Jonathan had injured his right shoulder, which meant holding a weapon, aiming it at his own chest, pulling the trigger with force. Wouldn't have just been difficult. It would have been physically impossible. With that, the Cruz family made a bold decision. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit. It wasn't just about money. It was a strategy. A legal move to put Brenda under oath. Force her to speak. Make her explain, on record, what really happened that night. Because maybe if justice wouldn't come through the system, it could be dragged into the light. The courtroom was packed. Tension hung in the air so thick you could feel it pressing against your skin. After years of silence, whispers, and doubt, the moment had come. Brenda Lazaro had shown up, but she didn't come to talk. Every time she was asked a question, she responded the same way. I invoke the fifth. Again. And again. And again. She didn't deny. She didn't explain. She simply refused. The Fifth Amendment gave her that right, to stay silent to avoid incriminating herself. It's usually used in criminal trials, but here it was being deployed in a civil courtroom. And it said more than any testimony could. But the jury, they heard plenty. They heard from Danielle Cruz, Jonathan's sister, the one who knew the truth long before the world caught up. They heard from Sheila Wysocki, the private investigator who dug deeper than anyone. They heard from a forensic pathologist, from a gunshot residue expert, from neighbors, from friends, from Emily and Jacob Ramsey, one after the other. The puzzle started coming together. And then came the evidence. The breakup message Jonathan sent just one day before his death, proof he was ready to walk away. The gunshot residue on both of Brenda's hands, while Jonathan only had it on his right. The inconsistency in her story about where she was and what happened when the shot was fired. The strange message, I want to die, sent from Jonathan's phone. A message his best friend swore he never would have written. The delayed 911 call, over 20 minutes of silence before she reached for help. The autopsy that ended in a shrug, undetermined. Her absence from the funeral. The cold message she sent Danielle on Facebook after it was over. Piece by piece, the jury saw it. Not just a tragedy, a cover-up. In 2022, after weeks of testimony cross-examinations and quiet gasps from the gallery, the verdict came down. Brenda Lazaro was found civilly responsible for the death of Jonathan Cruz. The jury ordered her to pay $206 million to the Cruz family. It wasn't about the money. It never was. Jonathan's mother, Pam, stood outside the courthouse surrounded by reporters, her eyes full of emotion, her voice clear. It's not the money I care about. I just wanted the truth to come out. And then she said the words that echoed across every news outlet in the country. Now everyone knows who took my son from me. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime documentaries. See you in the next video.